Nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Itam Shri Radhika Prananatha Pada Sarojayo Yena Premanubhutyasha Dattam Tam Shri Gurum Bhaje Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashodjitan Purna Prema Rasodsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payurasho Mudakelato Bande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Murdnani Patyakshito Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripakrite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhuttanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surito Pangur Mama Mandamate Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Adadana-strinam dantoyer yacheham puna puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhulisyam Janma Janmani Abhirapali Patiputra Kanta Dasya Bilashati Balashpavara Sri Rupa Chintamala Sapti Sangsto Matsvanta Durdanta Haiturastam Raganugami Bhajano Lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasara Smaratam Brajendhum Shri Rupa Pada Kamala Shrita Cheta Samme Chitam Satam Madhukari Yatu Pada Padme Bhaktir Ya Nikhilartha Varga Jananiya Brahma Sakshat Krite Anandati Shaya Prada Vishaya Jat Sukyat Vimuktir Yaya Shri Radha Ramanam Param Bhajayugam Yasya Mahanashrayo Ya Karya Vrajalokavat Gurutara Premnaiva Tasyai Namah Yad Ramya Nikhila Ghashanga Shamani Shrutra Tritim Sangata Yasvadya Rasikai Sukabdi Janani Dhikarya Mukti Spriham Yadhyata Hridaye Vrajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandini Saji Yad Hari Bhakta Vrinda Mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojanavatar Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar, Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire on this earth, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again, today we will continue our discussion of Padyavali, and in particular, discussion of the section on Bhagavad-dharma-tattva, and therein the subject of jāti buddhi in regard to Vaiṣṇavas, or the subject of how to understand how both Vaiṣṇavatva and the status of being twice born is meant to be honored, and who is eligible for what, and who at what stage benefits from what. So last time we completed our discussion of the Bhagavad 3:33, 6 and 7, a couple of statements of Devahuti to Kapiladev, which are cited by Sanatana Gosvami, Rupa Gosvami, and Jiva Gosvami in their works regarding the nature of Uttama Bhakti. And we looked at what is the established etiquette, or what Jiva Gosvami called Shishtachar, in this regard, and specifically in regard to the statement that one, quote, immediately becomes eligible to perform a Soma Yaga what is the immediacy and what is the eligibility described there, then we analyzed that over the last 2 classes and saw how both Sridhar Goswami and Jiva Gosvami following him understood this eligibility to refer to respectability and not to an injunction to practically go about performing a Soma Yaga if someone is not born in one of the upper 3 Varnas, and Sri Chakravarti Pad arguing that yes, it can be seen that way as per one of his commentaries or in his other commentary, that alternately it could be taken that there is a literal state of eligibility, but because there is no precedent for acting on that eligibility in society, and doing so would likely evoke objection and criticism in society, it's better it not ever be done, nor would it be advantageous to do so for those following the path of bhakti, since they don't have anything to gain by going off and performing those rites from the path of karma anyway. So, having discussed all of that, we'll proceed a bit further into our analysis of this overall subject matter. And I know it's long, I know it's technical, but we're making our way through it, and I hope it brings some clarity to these subject matters, which are of historical significance and do pertain to customs that have been significant in terms of how the Gaudiya tradition has been practiced over the last century. So, I'm picking up from where I left off, same file, etc. So, also noteworthy in regard to Sri Sanatana Pad's intention in his aforementioned descriptions of equality between Vaiṣṇavas and Brāhmaṇas is the description he gives in his Brihad Bhagavad-dharma-tattva of Gopakumar's journey to Mahar Loka, the 4th of the 7 lokas within the material universe, where the foremost of all Brāhmaṇas, the great rishis led by Bhrigu Muni, reside and continuously engage in the performance of yajna dedicated to Bhagavan Viṣṇu in his aspect as the Lord of such sacrifices, or Yajñeshvara. So we came on to this subject matter regarding these 2 verses of the Bhagavatam because we were discussing this statement that Sanatana Gosvami cites twice in the Hari Bhakti Vilas, where he speaks of someone receiving Vaishnava Diksha attaining the status of being a twice-born. And we're going about this discussion to determine what is his intention when he says that. Does he mean that by taking Vaishnava Diksha, you've attained the status of being a twice-born, and now therefore you should go and again acquire an Upanayan Samskar, which is what you need to become a twice-born since you're already a twice-born, and you should do that when you're not born in the families that are considered eligible for that? No, this is not what Sanatana Gosvami means, so we're in the process of demonstrating that. So now we come to an interesting point in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, where we talked about one instance earlier when at the Kumbh Mela, or at the bank of the Ganga, where Brāhmaṇas and then Vaiṣṇavas were spoken of as different classes, and Sanatana Gosvami distinguished that although Brāhmaṇas do have bhakti to Bhagavan if they are a genuine Brahmana, Vaishnavas are distinguished from Brahmanas because in Vaishnavas, bhakti is predominant and karma is non-existent or secondary, whereas in Brahmanas, the karma part is prominent and the bhakti part is secondary. So although when he says that the Brahmanas and the Vaishnavas were present on the bank of the Ganga, some of those Vaishnavas may also be Brahmanas, but they're called Vaishnavas and not Brahmanas because bhakti is prominent in them rather than simply Brahmanatva. But the Brahmanas then refer to the non-Vaishnav Brahmanas. So that much he explained earlier. So now we get another interesting point which shows the spirit of Vaishnavism, or the spirit of a Vaishnava, in regard to Brahmanas and in regard to the status of being twice born. So, when Gopakumar arrives there, the great rishis exhort him to give up his Vaishya status, accept the status of a Brahmana, and engage in yajna in their company, in accord with their customs and attitudes. So here you go. Gopakumar, by virtue of his Vaishnava Diksha, his chanting of the Vaishnava mantra, is now being given the opportunity. You can be a Brahmin. We'll make you a Brahmin and you can do yajna with us. So does Gopakumar accept the offer? Gopakumar, who had deep shraddha in the path of bhakti, autobiographically describes his own reaction to this as follows. Quote, hearing that is, the exhortation of the great rishis in Maharloka to become a Brahmana and perform worship of the Lord of the universe by means of sacrifice, as is done by these rishis in Maharloka, O Brahmana, I thought, greater joy shall come about by being a Vaishya, rather than a Brahmana, because the worship of Vaishya and not a Brahmana can perform of Prabhu, meaning Bhagavan, and of these Brahmanas here in Maharloka, who are his bhaktas. In other words, if I become a Brahmin, then I can't worship Brahmins, because I am a Brahmin. But if I'm a Vaishya, I can worship Bhagavan, and I can worship Brahmanas. That's better. It'll be more joyful to worship Bhagavan and Brahmanas than become a Brahmin and just worship Bhagavan. Then this is one reason. Now he gives another reason. Also, slackening in regard to my own japa, which is imperative, which was taught to me by a genuine guru, and which has had genuine observable results, shall also arise as a result of oneness with those of singular fixity upon yajna. That is, if I were to become one of these brahmanas who engages solely in yajna. So he thinks, but if I become a Brahmin and I do yajna all the time, then I won't be able to do my mantra japa. I won't be able to chant the Gopal mantra the way I do now. I'll have to do all these other mantras. And I don't want that. I've gotten so much profound benefit from the Gopal mantra. I've received this Gopal mantra from my guru. I don't want to give up my nishta in the Gopal mantra and go off and engage in all this Vedic yajna. So he doesn't want to slacken in his Vaishnavata. He doesn't want to lessen his absorption in activities related to the path of bhakti, and he'd rather worship Brahmanas than be a Brahmana. Therefore, no thank you. I don't want to be a Brahmana. I'm going to stay a Vaishya. So, therefore, honoring them, that is, the Brahmanas of Maharloka, but not accepting Brahmanahood, I dwelled there in the great joy manifested of its own accord among the Prajapatis. The purport of Gopakumar's statement is also explained by Sri Sanatana Pad in his commentary. So how does Sanatana Gosvami emphasize this point? The purport is this: full service to these brahmanas shall not come about by being a brahmana. That is, if I were to become a brahmana myself, because of the non-occurrence of servitude to brahmanas, that is, because upon becoming a brahmana, I would no longer have the privilege of rendering service to brahmanas. Furthermore, my joy shall be greater than even theirs, that is, than even these brahmanas, by being a Vaishya, by virtue of the privilege a Vaishya has of being able to render service to these Vaiṣṇavas, that is, these Brahmana Vaiṣṇavas, and to the Lord of Yajna, meaning Bhagavan. So where does joy come from? Seva. So who has more seva, he has more joy. And I want to be joyful. Therefore, I'd rather be a Vaishya and worship the Brahmanas and worship Bhagavan than be a Brahmana and just worship Bhagavan. Here, Sri Sanatana Pad makes it clear that the spirit of a Vaishnava is not that of wanting to become a Brahmana, but rather that of cherishing the opportunity to serve Brahmanas, since Vaishnavas know this is pleasing to Sri Bhagavan. So we discussed this at length earlier, statements of Narada, statements of Rishabdev, statements of Prithu Maharaj, statements of Sri Krishna himself, all speaking about how Bhagavan is pleased by worship of Brahmanas. So Vaishnavas consider honoring Brahmanas part of their service to Bhagavan. So they're happy with that. They're not thinking, why do we have to serve these people just because of they were born in this group and we didn't get to be, they're not hung up on that. That wasn't a problem for them. They're content with that. They see this as something they can do to honor Bhagavan, and they see that arrangement as coming from Bhagavan. So they honor that and they find joy in that. Sri Jiva also discusses this subject in Bhakti Sandarbha and makes it clear that Vaiṣṇavas do not desire to receive the respect that Brāhmaṇas do, even though they have Shraddha that a Vaiṣṇava is not only equal to a Brahmana in respectability, but rather more respectable than a Brahmana. So, Amanina manadena kirtaniya sada hari. Hari is to be praised always, not desiring respect, and giving respect to others. So a Vaishnava both has firm conviction that the status of a Vaishnava is greater than the status of a Brahmana, and as such is happy to honor Brahmanas as though they were superior. Because what is greatness, right? Greatness is devotion, greatness is respect, greatness is appreciation and expression of appreciation for the merits in others. So Vaishnavas are greater by virtue of their capacity to appreciate those things, and they express that greatness by honoring even those who ontologically might be considered of lesser status, and they prefer the status of actually being greater, but acting as if they're lower and treating the other as better, because that's actually more deeply fulfilling. So Jiva Gosvami, he addresses this point from another direction in the Bhakti Sandarbha. So he says, quote, even holding the Kshatriya Srimad Ambarish's feet was enacted even by the highly learned and revered ascetic Brahmana sage Durvasa upon his becoming aware of the greatness of bhakti, after this was explained to him by Bhagavan Vishnu. So he's referring to the 9th canto discussion where Durvasa realizes that a Vaishnava is even greater than a Brahmana. He, one of the greatest of Brahmanas, is ultimately humbled in front of this gentle, harmless Vaishnava who just accepts the attempted murder that Durvasa cast upon him and realizes that the Vaishnava's mentality is actually superior to his own. Bhakti is actually the greatness of Ambarish's bhakti is actually fit to be worshipped by him, so he falls at Ambarish's feet. So Jiva Goswami is referring to this instance, saying that even Durvasa held the feet of Ambarish. So even the great Vairagi, Brahmin, Rishi, sage is bowing down and holding the feet of a Grihasta Vaishnava king who's engaged in Vishai. So what the Vairagi, educated section is sort of has a tendency to look down on people involved in material affairs, but even in the midst of that dynamic, Durvasa holds the feet of Ambarish because Ambarish has bhakti, and he realizes that bhakti is even greater than what he has. Or the bhakti that Ambarish has is even greater than his own. So, although this happens, yet that was certainly not desired by Ambarish. In other words, did Ambarish want that Durvasa would have this whole realization and finally bow down to him and recognize that we're the ones that are really great? Was that how Ambarish really felt? Not at all. Ambarish really wanted to just serve Durvasa, and he was sad that Durvasa got angry. He didn't want Durvasa to suddenly show this great respect to him because he's a Vaishnava. He just wanted to happily serve this Brahmin. So, yet that was certainly not desired by Ambarish, because of Ambarish's disinterest towards that being evident there itself in the narration of this incident in Srimad Bhagavatam. Furthermore, because of obeisance being offered to Brahmanas in general by Bhagavan himself personally, and by Uddhava and others, that is, another great bhaktas and companions of Bhagavan, that is, having one's feet held or in any other manner being bowed to or shown great formal reverence by a Brahmana, is under no circumstances to be desired or expected by other Vaishnavas. So, because Vaishnavas are considered from this scriptural perspective superior to Brahmanas, do we need to make some campaign in society to prove that the Vaishnavas are really greater and make all the Brahmanas finally bow down and respect the Vaishnavas? Well, not according to Jiva Goswami. In other words, That's not the mood of the Vaishnavas. The greatness of the Vaishnavas is to be happy in their humble position of honoring the Brāhmaṇas. They don't want Brāhmaṇas to start going, oh no, you're a Vaishṇava, we should worship you. The Vaishnavas want the Brāhmaṇas to take seva from them. They want implies they want the Brāhmaṇas to think that they're entitled to getting seva even from Vaishnavas. The Vaishnavas are not disturbed by this. The Vaishnavas are happy about this because it gives them the chance to serve. If the people don't see it as part of their responsibilities or within the scope of their conventions to accept the service, then we'll never get to offer that service. So we need them to think that they're fit for the service in order for them to accept it. So, in other words, do the Vaishnavas want to go out and, try to change this sort of outlook among people? They don't. They're glad for the Brāhmaṇas to think as they do and to respect them as such. This is also so because of an incidence of breaking Bhagavan's order, if desiring or expecting honor from Brāhmaṇas should occur. And moreover, Bhagavan wouldn't like it either. In other words, the Vaishnavas themselves wouldn't like it, and that's not what Bhagavan wants. So what does Bhagavan Krishna himself said in the Bhagavad 10:64-41? He says, "O you all who are my own," so speaking to Vaishnavas or his bhaktas, "never harm even a Brahmana who has committed an offense. Be he beating or cursing you profusely, always offer obeisance to him." So this is a strong remark from none other than Sri Krishna. Even if you get beaten and dissed, you should just give dandavat to that. So, not an easy thing to do, but a Vaishnava who has heard this instruction will certainly respect that. So, suppose someone, isn't even beaten or dissed or whatever, but maybe they see that there's some abnormality in a Brahmana's character, or the Brahmana has a bad habit, or the Brahmana does certain things which are not really all that wonderful, or not that great, or what have you. Does that justify us now going on a campaign to try to make people think that Brahmanas are lesser than Vaishnavas, and Vaishnavas should be given all the respect and honor and facilities of society, and Brahmanas should be sidelined? If Bhagavan is content for Brahmanas to receive honor even from his bhaktas, and to be honored by his bhaktas even when they curse and beat them, then we have to think very carefully about, how this social balance is designed in the viewpoint of the Bhagavatam and these texts, and how we can act in the spirit of that. And what really Vaishnavism is all about is greatness is shown through bhakti, through respecting others, through honoring others, and through feeling joy and satisfaction in those acts of service, not in attaining a status of being regarded as superior. Why is the Vaishnava considered superior? Because they have the capacity to respect and honor and joyfully do so everything else in a way that's deeper than any other category of being in the world. So the quote-unquote greatness and the respect that comes with greatness is never something that's coveted in and of itself, but something that flows in the wake of bhakti. So, let's apply some of these statements now to our theme of discussion. In keeping with the spirit of aforecited statements, Sri Sanatana Pad's intent in presenting the aforecited statement from Tattva Sagara and stating that a Vaishnava attains Brahmanahood by means of Diksha and thus has equality with Brahmanas is evidently not meant to be taken literally or completely. In other words, if Jiva Gosvami over here is saying that no Vaishnava wants to be honored as a Brahmana or more so than a Brahmana, and then this statement says that one attains the status of a Brahman by taking Vaishnava Diksha, does that mean that now because we have Vaishnava Diksha, we're going to accept and take on the position of Brahmanas? Well, no, that's not why Sanatana Gosvami said that, because that's not the spirit of Vaishnavism. That's not what Jiva Gosvami is saying here in the Sandarbhas. That's not what Gopakumar is expressing through Sanatana Gosvami and the Brihad Bhagavatamrita. This is just meant to show the power of Vaishnava Diksha, but it's not meant to become a convention in society or change the social dynamics that are designed in the Bhagavatam. So rather, a Vaishnava, that is one who has received Vaishnava Diksha, can be considered to have equality with Brāhmaṇas in the qualified sense that a Vaishnava, irrespective of caste, is like a Brahmana free from the sin that causes one to be born in a low caste, and two, like a Brahmana eligible to perform worship of forms of Bhagavan like the Shalagram Śilā, and three, like a Brahmana worthy of special respect. So you attain the status of a Brahmin by taking Vaishnava Diksha. Does that mean you now go and do the Somayagya? No. It means you're purified of sin. It means you can do Vaishnava Puja, you can do Shalagram Puja, other types of puja to Bhagavan, and you're worthy of special respect. This is why he's quoting this verse. This is the intent of the citation. But it's not meant to enjoin a change in social conventions or for people on the path of bhakti to go off and do a bunch of rites that are part of the path of karma or these other things. So immediately after making these statements about Vaishnavas in the Digdarshani-tika on Hari Bhakti Vilas 5.455, Sri Sanatana Pad also goes on to say that Vaishnavas are not just equal to, but rather superior to Brahmanas. Quote, furthermore, in comparison between Vaishnavas and Brahmanas, the superiority to Brahmanas, even of Vaishnavas born in low castes, is proclaimed by statements such as that of Prahlad in the Bhagavat 7.9.10. Quote, I consider a dog cooker whose mind, words, actions, wealth, and life are dedicated to Bhagavan, superior to a Brahmana possessed of all 12 Brahmanical qualities, who is averse to the lotus feet of he of lotus navel. This point is also made elsewhere in Srimad Bhagavatam by Sri Rishabdev, immediately following his statements in praise of Brahmanas cited earlier. Quote, for those possessionless bearers of bhakti to me, who have no desire for anything even from me, I who am infinite, higher than the highest, that is superior even to Brahma and so forth, and the supreme master of Svarga and Apavarga, meaning moksha, what shall be the need of anything else or anyone else? Means my bhaktas, they're happy with me. They're happy with their relation with me, with their devotion to me. They don't want anything else. So Chakravarti Pad portrays the intent of the statement as follows. Quote, Rishabdev says, thus my bhaktas are the best. They are worthy of worship more so than anyone else. That is even more so than the Brahmanas described in the previous verse. So this statement that a Vaishnava attains Brahmanatva, this isn't even big praise, because throughout the Bhagavatam, the Vaishnava is said to be superior to Brahmanas. So it's no secret that the Vaishnava has equal or greater status than a Brahman. It's well known, but that status doesn't mean that there should be, that Vaishnavas are going to go and usurp or play the role of Brahmanas in society. So when in this way it is aptly understood how Vaishnavas are most worthy of respect, not just among human beings, but among all living entities throughout the universe, then the severity of the fault of neglecting to show them due respect because of their caste can also be aptly comprehended. So now this whole topic is about jāti buddhi, or understanding the significance of caste in the case of a Vaishnava. So there was a tendency, and in some cases there still is, the idea to think that someone may be a Vaishnava, but if they're born in a low caste, or they're born in no caste at all, and what you call an outcast, then they're not really, we don't really need to respect them the way we respect people who are born in Brahmin families, or people who are born in other castes that are considered especially respectable. So that point was a talking point, if you will, within, in the life and teachings of Ramanuja Acharya. You see this was a significant social dynamic that played out. It was very significant that Ramanuja Acharya, as a Brahmana, accepted Diksha from Mahapurna, who was a Shudra. This was like a shocking thing in the society, but it was a strong precedent to show that Vaishnavism doesn't have any bearing on Brahmanism, that he might have been born in a Shudra family, but he's a highly worshipable Vaishnava, therefore even I as a Brahmin can accept Diksha from him. Now we know in the Hari Bhakti Vilas there is some respect for the role of caste within the role of the Guru, and it's advised to take Diksha from a Brahmin Vaishnava when that's possible and available. That itself is stated in the Hari Bhakti Vilas. So these things are not sort of completely jettisoned, but the principles are also understood. So the main fault or the main issue is if we prioritize the role of caste over the role of bhakti or over the Vaishnavatva within the heart of the person. This becomes disrespectful to bhakti itself, and that's the whole thing that's at stake here. That's the whole issue, is that bhakti should be recognized as supremely powerful, supremely sacred, supremely worshipable. So where bhakti is present, that should be respected, even if the person was low-born, so to speak. And if one sees that the caste or the birth influence is greater or gives greater precedent or emphasis to that than the presence of bhakti, that's a slight to the bhakti's presence there. That's considered a type of aparad. So the whole discussion here is about how to show due respect to that presence of bhakti. So Jiva Gosvami takes this up in the Bhakti Sandarbha, again in the same Anucheda we were discussing earlier. So he says, exaltedness on the part of a Vaishnava is verily to be honored even in any sort of caste, that is, regardless of which caste a Vaishnava is born into, in accord with the conduct of Sri Prithu, described in 421.12. Quote, Prithu Maharaj, the sole bearer of the stick, meaning the ruler over the 7 islands, was of unchecked order everywhere, apart from the Brahmana community and apart from those of Achyuta's Gotra, meaning the Vaishnavas. That is, he did not rule over Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, but rather honored them and did so in a regard to all of the Vaishnavas, regardless of where and in which caste they were born. Jiva Goswami also cites statements from the Itihas Samuchaya in this regard. Quote, remembered, conversed with, or worshipped, O best of the twice-born, a bhakta of Bhagavan, although a chandal, purifies automatically. Furthermore, otherwise, that is, neglecting to honor all Vaishnavas irrespective of their caste is a fault. A fault is heard of there. It means in the same text, specifically, quote, one who sees a bhakta of Bhagavan to be a Shudra, tribesman, or dog cooker, because of commonality in caste, certainly goes to Naraka. Sri Sanatana Pad comments on the second of these verses as follows. One who sees a bhakta of Bhagavan as being equal in caste to non-bhaktas of particular castes, quote, he is of low caste because of there being commonality in caste between him and others of low caste, or he is a bhakta too, like other Shudras, certainly goes to Naraka. So if you think, oh yeah, he was born in that caste, that guy's also born in that caste, therefore they're the same, and you don't see that bhakti is present and making a difference in the case of one in comparison to another where it's absent, then you're disrespecting bhakti, you're not showing due respect to bhakti's presence. Therefore, it is said, you quote, go to Naraka, or in other words, you remain in a state of ignorance, you proceed in an inauspicious direction. So, more on this topic. Sri Sanatana Pad and Sri Jiva Pad also cite other statements that lay out a vivid gradation in regard to the exaltedness of Brahmanas and Vaishnavas. Quote, a performer of the Satra Yaga, that is a difficult form of sacrifice only a highly trained Brahmana can perform, is superior to thousands of Brahmanas. One adept in the entire Vedanta, that is one who knows the conclusion of all the Vedas, is superior to thousands of performers of the Satra Yaga. A bhakta of Vishnu is superior to crores of knowers of the entire Vedanta. That's a strong statement. A bhakta of Vishnu is superior to crores of knowers of the entire Vedanta. And one who is one-pointed in one's bhakti to Vishnu is superior to thousands of Vaiṣṇavas who are not yet one-pointed. One-pointed persons reach the supreme abode. So, akanti bhakti. Elsewhere, Sanatana Gosvami gives a lot of stress to this as the principal characteristic of a Vaishnava, to be one-pointed upon Bhagavan. Moreover, affection for my bhaktas, approval of my worship, fondness for hearing discussion of me, transformations of the voice, eyes, and so forth, that is experiencing sattvika bhavas as a result of emotions related to me, dancing for the sake of Vishnu, forsaking deceit, alternately you could take it as arrogance or pretension for his sake, performing ritual worship of him oneself, and not subsisting upon Vishnu, that is, using acts of bhakti to Vishnu to earn a livelihood. Even a malecha, that is, person of the lowest caste, in whom these 8 types of bhakti are present, is the best of Brāhmaṇas and greatest of sages. He is a knower, that is a jnani, and wise, a pundit. Give charity, etc. to him, and accept prasad, etc. from him, since he is also worshipable as Hari is. So he lists characteristics, or he characterizes the mentality of a Vaishnava. They do worship of Bhagavan, they honor his bhaktas, they dance for him, they feel, joy in their worship of him, and they don't turn their life of devotion into a career and live off of that. And that type of person, you can say, is the greatest pundit, the greatest jnani, the greatest brahman, the greatest sage. In other words, the bhakta is the greatest of all people, so you can support that person, you can receive the blessings of that person, you can consider him worshipable just like Bhagavan. And a similar statement, spoken by Bhagavan himself, he says, a chatur Vedi, that is a brahmana versed in the 4 Vedas, is not dear to me, if they are not my bhakta. Even a dog cooker who is my bhakta, however, is dear to me. Give charity, etc. to him, and accept prasad, etc. from him, since he is also worshipable as I am. In the spirit of praising the exaltedness of Vaishnavas in comparison even to Brāhmaṇas, there are statements cited by Sri Sanatana and Sri Jiva that speak so as to belittle non-Brahmana, non-bhakta Brāhmaṇas. Okay, so we heard some of these statements that speak all about how great the Brāhmanas are, how even Vaishnavas worship Brāhmanas, and so on. But then you do also hear some statements that seem to convey the opposite, such as the following. These are cited in Bhakti Sandarbha. Quote, what is the use of numerous statements in this regard? Non-Vaishnavas, although Brāhmanas, are never to be looked at, never to be touched, and never to be spoken to. Quote, like a dog cooker is not to be looked at, one should not look at a non-Vaishnava Brahmana in this world. Even a Vaishnava outside the Varnas, that is, who does not belong to any of the 4 Varnas, purifies the 3 worlds. Bhaktas of Bhagavan are not Shudras, rather they are accepted as Bhagavatas, that is, to belong to Bhagavan and not to any caste. Among all the Varnas, they are Shudras who are not Bhaktas of Janardana. In this regard, Sri Jiva observes that there can appear to be a contradiction between these statements, that one should not even look at a non-Vaishnava Brahmana, and the aforecited statement of Bhagavan Sri Krishna from 1064-41, that one should offer obeisance to Brahmanas even if they beat and curse you. So on the one hand, if he's not a Vaishnava, don't even talk to this Brahman, don't even look at his face. On the other hand, if a Brahmana beats you and curses you, you should still respect this Brahmana. So how are we to reconcile these two instructions? He reconciles this apparent contradiction by taking it that the prohibition on looking at non-Brahmanas refers only to attachment to seeing them. The import being that the instruction in the aforecited verse from Padma Puran to not look at a non-Vaishnava Brahmana should be applied in the sense that one should not foster attachment to seeing non-Vaishnava Brahmanas. And thus, Bhagavan Sri Krishna's order in 1064-41 to always offer obeisance to them stands, meaning, in practice, one should always show respect to a Brahmana, regardless of his behavior or whether he is a Vaishnava or not. Yet, one should not foster attachment to seeing a Brahmana if he is not a Vaishnava. So this is the reconciliation. In other words, if you want to cultivate bhakti, then you'll have to keep a distance from people who are not cultivating bhakti, who are not interested in cultivating bhakti, especially people who know about bhakti and still intentionally don't want to cultivate it. But that doesn't mean that just because you want to avoid something, that you need to disrespect that. This is an important balance, and sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes you'll find, vairagis can be disrespectful to women because they want to avoid women. But just because they might want to avoid women doesn't in any way justify that they treat them disrespectfully. Similarly, non-bhaktas or others, whoever we might disagree with or for whatever reason we want to keep distance with, avoidance and disrespect are two very different concepts, very different things that ought not be blended, or the value of one ought not be used to justify the other. So here, in the case of Brahmanas, this order of Krishna, respect the Brahman no matter what his behavior is, stands. But don't take interest in associating with him, don't foster attachment to such relations, but just respect them with it in a detached manner. This is the balance. So, Sri Jiva adds in this regard that, quote, such conduct is also observed on the part of Yudhishthir, Draupadi, and others in regard to Ashvatthama. So a very interesting precedent in the Bhagavatam itself. The import being that the Pandavas and Draupadi offered respect to Ashvatthama, who was the son of Drona, a Brahmana, despite the fact that Ashvatthama killed their sons and fired a Brahmastra at Uttara in an attempt to kill their future grandson Parikshit. So what more extreme test could you get? Honor a Vaishnava honor a Brahmana even if he beats and curses you. Okay, how about he kills all your sons and tries to kill your grandson, and not just tries, but fires a Brahmastra, fires a nuclear bomb at you. What are you going to do now, right? So, knowing the wish of Krishna, knowing that Krishna would want them to be respectful to a Brahmana, even when he's done as heinous of a thing as you could possibly do, how do Yudhishthir, Draupadi, and the Pandavas treat Ashvatthama? This is a very interesting precedent. So Jiva Gosvami draws this out in the Bhagavatam. And he adds the following in regard to how Vaishnavas are to be respected. So, what ultimately they did, Draupadi didn't let the Pandavas kill Ashvatthama, and they said he's a Brahman, and Krishna told Arjuna, okay, you can't kill a Brahman, but he needs to be punished for what he's done, so you decide what is to be done. So Arjuna just cuts his hair, takes the jewel off of his head, in other words, makes a cultural mark on him, so to speak, that proves that he was defeated. And among especially these warrior types, defeat is considered more painful than death. So he, quote unquote, killed him or punished him just by having him suffer the public humiliation of being defeated. But still they treated him with respect. They gave him due process, so to speak, in modern jurisprudence terms. They didn't justify, taking a rash action or, doing what you call like a lynch mob or something on him. He killed our family, rah! It wasn't like that. Everything was extremely principled. Everything was done, with clear deliberation according to principles, etc. So Jiva Goswami draws this out to say that Brahmanas are respected despite even their misbehavior. That doesn't mean they don't also receive due punishment when punishment is meant to be administered. And of course, we know that the Smriti Shastras do prescribe different types of punishment for different varnas rather than one type of law applicable to all human beings. That was also a feature of that manner of social organization. But so, although it might be adjusted, there nevertheless was a code of conduct and justice applicable to these people. It's not that they're just, running wild, but that there was a set of boundaries, and those boundaries were maintained with respect. So now, how does this apply also to Vaiṣṇavas? Because ultimately this whole discussion is about how to duly respect Vaiṣṇavas. So Jiva Goswami makes the following important remarks. Quote, even the conduct of Vaiṣṇavas, however, is not to be judged by worshippers of Vaiṣṇavas. This is a little statement, very profound. Even the conduct of Vaiṣṇavas is not to be judged by worshippers of Vaiṣṇavas. So it means one duty of every Vaishnava is to serve Vaishnavas, to do Vaishnava seva. So we want to be a, quote, worshipper of a Vaishnava. So to worship someone, do we need to judge their character? No. To offer your worship, what is the person you're worshiping? What exactly do they think? What do they do when they're not taking puja from you? You don't even have to care about that. You don't have to bother yourself with that. What did he do before he got here? What time did he wake up in the morning? What time does he go to bed? How much does he chant? How much does he do this? How many rules does he follow? This, that, blah, 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 blah. None of it matters. If your mentality is, I want to worship a Vaishnava, then worship a Vaishnava. What does that Vaishnava do? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. You do far better not to even bother concerning yourself with it. So, and rather you ought not concern yourself with it. This is Jiva Goswami's point. So, what he says literally, Vaishnava pujikaistu, Vaiṣṇavānāṁ acharopi navicharaniya. The achar, the behavior, the conduct, whatever of Vaishnavas, is not to be analyzed, is not to be judged. In other words, even you looking and measuring and thinking, this guy does this guy does that, what time does he wake up, what does he chant, what does he know, blah, 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 blah. That itself is forbidden. There's no need for any of that. Like, they're a Vaishnava, worship them, honor them. Exactly what they do you need to compare yourself to them or try to rank them in your status book of who's who and all this? No, you don't need to do any of that. The spirit of Vaishnavism is respecting people, is honoring people, not judging them. So, even the conduct of Vaishnavas is not to be judged by worshippers of Vaishnavas. Why not? This is the teaching of Bhagavan Sri Krishna in Bhagavad-gita 9:30. Quote, even if possessed of extreme misconduct, he who worships me, being devoted to no other devata, is to be regarded as verily virtuous, or sadhu, since he is rightly resolved. So even if they have extreme misconduct, if they're a Vaishnava, if they have this idea, I want to worship Bhagavan, then respect them. Consider them to have the merit of having formed this very valuable resolve that I will worship the Supreme Absolute being Bhagavan and not any lesser being. This resolve is highly praiseworthy, it's profoundly beneficial. Honor and respect that resolve that they've made. Now, how exactly do they act on that resolve? How much do they reject all that is unfavorable to that resolve? Don't worry about that so much. That's their life, that's their consideration. Don't worry about that. You don't need to worry, but preoccupy yourself with that. You can see that they have this resolve and honor them. And as is stated in Garuda Puran, quote, one fully endowed with Vishnu Bhakti, although or even if possessed of deceitful behavior and devoid of any ashram, purifies all people like the risen sun. Wow. Even a deceitful Vaishnava purifies others. Now you might say, well, what is this? How can a deceitful person purify others? Means maybe they're deceitful, maybe they're misbehaved, but at the same time, they do have some understanding of Vaishnavata. Maybe they don't act on it properly. But nevertheless, the fact that what they've understood, that itself still has value, even if their behavior hasn't come in alignment to it yet. Whose has completely? Practically nobody's. To become a completely one-pointed Vaishnava is profoundly difficult, profoundly rare. So maybe someone's bringing the principles in line with their actions is still way out of whack. Well, nevertheless, someone will still see the principled side of them, and that has value. And that can't be minimized or negated just because their behavior isn't always in alignment with that. So, thus, this verse, namely 333.7, was cited specifically earlier, aho bhata. That is, now we come back to the verse we talked about earlier. A dog cooker on the tip of whose tongue your name is present is highly honorable. Those who take your name have undergone austerity, conducted sacrifices, bathed in all tīrthas, become noble, and studied the Veda. The word dog cooker is present with emphasis specifically on the etymological meaning of the word. That is, the word is used to refer literally to people who cook and eat dog meat. So the guy who's still eating meat is considered to have bathed and become purified. Think about it. Think about it. Consequently, a person who is his bhakta is not to be disrespected on account of his being of low caste, or even on account of his being possessed of misconduct. That means even a meat-eating Vaishnava must be respected. You heard it right, straight from the Bhakti Sandarbha. Even a Vaishnava who eats meat should be shown respect. You can't justify disrespecting people just because they eat meat. Now, who does that? Well, in most of the world, people could care less what is your diet, and they don't think that your diet has a direct cause and effect relationship on the nature of your, piety or your, relationship with God. But among Vaishnavas and among certain persons who've been preached to in a particular way, it's become a big deal. And I'm not here to in any way endorse or support the act of eating meat. But we should very carefully understand this point, that the conduct of a Vaishnava is not to be judged by those who want to honor Vaishnavas. So whose diet is how pure, that's not the main consideration. And just because someone's diet is impure doesn't mean we're justified in treating them disrespectfully, in treating them as though we're, superior, as being condescending to them. The Vaishnava in them is always to be respected, irrespective of the presence of misconduct. Consequently, I'll read it again. A person who is his bhakta is not to be disrespected on account of being of low caste, or even on account of his being possessed of misconduct. And therefore, certainly is not to be disrespected on account of being disrespectful towards oneself. Now here's another sticker, right? In other words, yeah, I'd be nice to all the Vaishnavas, but as soon as they insult you, or as soon as they make you, prick your ego, then suddenly you get angry with them and you treat them like this and you treat them like that. So therefore, it is said in the Guru Puran, one who after hearing harsh words uttered by a Bhagavata can offer obeisance and speak with forbearance is certainly a Vaishnava. In other words, if you can digest disrespect and respond to it with respect, if you, by virtue of your own spiritual acumen and maturity and understanding and devotion, cannot sink into an exchange of disrespect, but transmute the disrespect and respond to it nevertheless with respect, that makes you a Vaishnava. Or that is a characteristic principle of being a Vaishnava. So this is a very nice point and a very nice ideal to aspire to. It's easy to sit here and repeat the words of Jiva Gosvami. I can't claim to live up to them in every case, but nevertheless I can say that when we hear these words of Jiva Gosvami, our lives become more meaningful because we can even see the challenges that we face in our life or the communications that we have with people as opportunities to practice our Vaishnavism. It's not that Vaishnava practice is just what we do on our asana in our room or just what we do at the temple when we visit, but it's actually part of the way we communicate with all human beings, part of the way we see and interact with everyone, all throughout all aspects of our life. So how beautiful, how wonderful is it, what is being a Vaishnava, and what is this wonderful, joyful attitude of a Vaishnava that's happy to worship Brāhmaṇas and not be a Brāhmana, and bow down to Brāhmaṇas even when they beat and curse them, and not judge other Vaishnavas and compare themselves to other Vaishnavas and worship other Vaishnavas, whatever their conduct may be, and respond with respect even to people who treat you with disrespect. These are the beautiful features that make, the company of Vaishnavas sublime, and are all alluded to in this wonderful verse of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Charnadapi sunichena, tarori vasahishnuna, amanina manadena, giving respect without desiring it for oneself. Kirtaniya sada hari. Hari is to be praised by someone like that. So we pray to become such a person, or even to aspire to such an ideal. We feel profoundly blessed to have that ideal in our life by the grace of our Guru, by the grace of the Vaishnavas, the Shastras, everything that's brought these teachings to us. So, I'll conclude here. We still haven't got all the way through this discussion of Vaiṣṇave jāti buddhi, but we're close, and I think in our next reading, we will finally come to the end of this topic. So, if anyone has any comments, questions, or corrections, or feedback of any other type, please feel free.
I think I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm outside.
I hear you. You sound clear to me.
Hi. Yeah, just simply an observation, basically. What happened in the history of India is that there was, at one point, there was great hatred towards the Brāhmaṇas, and I hear it from nowadays from people from India, and then South India, North India. They're all very much upset about this, caste system, they call it. Meaning, the lower you're born, they're deprived, and there's also just unprivileged group, how we call them, low class. They're not even part of Vedic society, as understood. They're born in slums, perhaps, or very like tribal places in India. And they become when they come to the West, they become successful. I know personally, the doctor that comes from, forget the name, just this low class in States, is very successful, intellectual person. And now we have also this contrasting picture in India where Brahmanas are still held strong to the tradition and being disrespected for being so strict and showing no mercy or respect to others, like Lord. They were just being, put down or criticized for behaving like so orthodox way that they would take bath because somebody, touched, or lower class touched him. And this is happening like as we speak. This is like thing happening in India as far as I understand. And I remember during reading that during times of beginning of 20th century, where in Bengal specifically, there was like search for looking for Hindu identity and Brahmas. There was a common thing that was going on in Bengal, this attack almost on Brahmanas. And as an offspring of that, this I think Gaudiya Math came out with that challenge to actually initiate give Brahmana threats to those who've been initiated as Brahmans. So it's like challenge, not really a part of any siddhanta or anything. the context, in the context of social context. So now we talk. Now we hear of Vaiṣṇavas that they do not require. They've been promoted. Like we are hearing that Vaiṣṇava is the Brāhmana Gosvami. And actually, Vaishnava, who is Vaishnava? Vaishnava is one who actually accepts that humble position, regardless of being promoted so high. So I'm just wondering if Vaishnava, who has that awareness that he is Vaishnava, and doesn't feel actually that that he occupies that position because of his own self-analysis, understanding one's own qualifications. Saying, "Oh, come on, I'm not okay. I'd like for bhakti. I like bhakti, but I would never promote myself above Brāhmaṇas." Yet Shastra says that the Vaishnava is such, is high in that regard. So it is nice. So I was wondering, because this also hints Shastra talks so loosely about bhakti. Bhakti, that's it, and bhakti is above everything. But there are different types of bhakti, different types of Vaishnavas. And I think I brought this last time, the point of who is Vaishnava, who is bhakti, what is bhakti. But what I hear from the presentations is that regardless what type of bhakti it is, bhakti is bhakti. And Elizabeth calls this concept with me, inside me, because if everything requires adhikar, then and of course, bhakti is given to, everybody has adhikar for bhakti. We know that. Yet, there must be some distinguished criteria by which you can say, oh, this, promising bhakta, no way. I mean, I cannot just put him on a high pedestal regardless, because he doesn't really have that, appealing sense of bhakti that, I want to bow down to. He just has some flavor of bhakti. But yet, what we hear from these presentations, that, regardless of whatever flavor or adhikar they have, they are, highest the Brāhmaṇas and of all. And I want to just, make myself understand what's the actual position I should take to really understand that. I'm not sure if you understand my question, my dilemma.
Are you wondering in practical terms, like how to relate with people you meet who are Vaishnavas? Is that where you're going with it?
Well, just, the understanding of how, I understand bhakti is supreme. That's because somebody recognizes the absolute as Krishna. Bhakti is the someone born with all existence. I understand that. But, in terms of, I think practical experience, I think I would say practically speaking, how you deal with situations that are not very clear. The Shastra is quite, blunt about, statements sometimes. But if you can just throw some hints to show how practically this can be exhibited in practice, I would appreciate it.
Well, that I think it's the 5th verse in the Upadeshamrita comes to mind, that anyone who's taken the name, in your mind, think they're a Vaishnava. If they have diksha, bow down to them. If they have knowledge, if they're adept in that, then you can practically render some service to them, you can learn from them, you can seek to cultivate a relationship with them. And then, at least the way Radharaman Goswami interprets it, and he gives it a 4th level, And if not only they have expertise in bhakti or knowledge about bhakti, but they actually have a heart that's free from ninda, that's free from any enmity, any defamation of anyone, then that person you'll always want their company, is one way the verse is read. So we can also derive other principles from this. In other words, if someone who's not bhajan avigya, or well educated and adept in bhajan, if they're not shushrushu, or they're not someone that you want to attentively serve and hear from, if someone who has that expertise and knowledge is that, then we can understand that people who lack that quality are not that. In other words, people who maybe have taken the name, have received diksha, are Vaiṣṇavas in some sense, then show respect to them. But that doesn't mean you need to interact intimately with them. It doesn't mean you necessarily go and try to learn from them, or you need to do a whole bunch of service to them. But it means that attempt that they're making, the presence of bhakti, the presence of Vaishnavata in them, show respect to that. But whose association do you really seek? Should you really desire? Those people who have a beautiful heart, whose heart is free from any ninda, whose heart is full of love, whose heart is full of prem. This is really what we want. So serve the people who have that, or at least know about that and are following the path to that in an adept way, and respect everybody. This is one way we can, boil down a practical, set of guidelines for how to navigate socially. Does that seem relevant to what you're reflecting on?
Sorry, definitely. Yeah, see, to understand these gradients, it's very important for one's own sake, I think, because you have to know how much you need to stretch and how much, because the respect should be placed where it belongs, is it not?
Absolutely.
To
neglect to respect the respectable is a problem, but also showing excessive respect where it's not meant to go, that also ends you up in a problem.
Exactly. There's some proverbs in Sanskrit. You respect small person, if you glorify a very small person, you make him small actually. If you glorify fool, he will actually prove that he's a fool. Anyway. Thank you very much. This is quite revealing. I think I want to talk more about it, like in the context of the practical application. Because sometimes I feel this, we go deep into Shastra and we become everything so crystal idealistic.
Sure.
And, you're not so always, especially in the context of Vedic culture. And we can hear some statements that are quite odd, in social context, and you understand, oh my God, people live in completely different understanding and concept, of servitude, and importance of social position, how to behave and act accordingly, not to disturb the environment or others and hurt yourself in a way. But nowadays, people just are mostly concerned about,
Oh, I think we lost you there. They're mostly concerned about what? I'm not hearing anything else. Your voice is very faint. Yeah. Okay, I can't hear you anymore. Well, I think I have to sign off for here today anyway. I've got another function in 15 minutes, so I'll need to ready for that. So again, it's been a blessing to discuss all these points, and it's been a long analysis, but I think it's brought out some important precedents in regard to the topic. So we should conclude finally in our next class. Vaiṣṇavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Radhe Shyam.